because I wanted to pursue a dream in politics, and he was always there to support me. We were here for a few years, and I decided that I probably needed to go to law school. If I was going to write some laws, I probably should know something about the laws. So I was working full-time, going to law school at night, which was a pretty brutal 4 years for us. I graduated in May 2008, took 2 months off to go study for the bar, and in August of 2008 was finally back. And it felt like we were starting our marriage all over again, because I was free, I was done with law school, I wasn't working, I didn't start my job until after Labor Day. And so August of 2008 was going to be this really fantastic time of just fun and hanging out and reconnecting after what had been 4 really difficult years. My interest in sitting around bored lasted about 2 days, and I decided that I needed a project at home. So I started remodeling our closet, knocking down walls, and creating a complete disaster around the house. My husband came home from work one day, and I was in the bedroom busily sanding some drywall, and he decided to help, and he hadn't been feeling really good for a couple of days. He had a bit of a flu, he was running a pretty high fever, and had been really nauseous. But he was feeling better that night, and so he decided to come help me sand a little bit. And there was, of course, drywall dust everywhere, and he sneezed. And when he sneezed, it dropped him to his knees. And so we got him to a chair, and I took his temperature, and it was still about 101. So we went to the emergency room that night. I figured he had appendicitis. He thought he probably had a gallbladder, or a gallstone. So we went to the emergency room. They ran tests, did an ultrasound, and they didn't see anything. So they sent us home. But as the doctor was sending us home, he said, the ultrasound tech, when he was doing the ultrasound check for a gallstone, he saw a couple spots on your liver. You should probably get that checked out. So we called the gastroenterologist the next day, and they scheduled Kurt for a CAT scan immediately, which sort of caught us off guard. And then they scheduled him for a colonoscopy and an endoscopy and started running a lot of tests. And 10 days later, he was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. So my perfectly healthy husband, with no sign of illness and no family history of cancer, was now given a terminal diagnosis. They told him he probably had weeks, maybe months. We walked out of that doctor's office, and he looked at me and he said, they don't know. Only God knows. And the fight was on. And for 15 months, he fought. And for 15 months, we lived a relatively normal life. He worked most times, got chemo every Friday, but was generally healthy, continued to sail, we traveled. We had a pretty good time considering what he was up against. By April, the primary tumor was gone, the lymph nodes were starting to clear, and we were really making progress, except for that really stubborn liver that we just couldn't get cleared. By about October, the disease started to come back, and they switched chemotherapies. The chemotherapy was really difficult on him. He got an infection, and right around Thanksgiving, got pneumonia. On November 30th, we checked into Johns Hopkins inpatient, and on December 2nd, they said he's not going to go home with you. And on December 13th, he died. Shortly after Kurt was diagnosed, like so many of you, I'm sure when you were diagnosed, we started doing the internet searches, trying to figure out what on earth had just happened to us. And in doing so, we came across an organization called the I'm Too Young for This Cancer Foundation. And it gave us a voice that we didn't otherwise have. Because when you're 30 and diagnosed with a terminal illness, you don't even know the words to use. And here was this whole website that used the words we needed, like not fair, unacceptable, outrageous. And so during the course of Kurt's cancer battle, we went to I2Y from time to time just to get a voice, a sense that we weren't alone in this. In January after Kurt died, through what I can only assume is some very creepy internet stalking, Matthew Zachary sent me an email and said, hey, I saw your husband die. I'd like to honor him on our radio show. Do you mind? And I said, no, of course not. That would be wonderful. Still reeling from what had just happened 3 weeks before that. And when they did the radio show tribute to my husband, they said exactly what I needed to hear, which is we are pissed off that this happened. This is outrageous that people are dying for this. And we just want to say, that we're here to stand with Jennifer, who is now going through her own survivorship experience, surviving the loss of her husband. In July, they invited me back on the radio show to talk about what it meant to be a surviving spouse, to talk about what it meant to deal with cancer in this sort of very different and unacceptable way. And in December, they asked me to be a member of the board of directors. So I've been a member of the board of I2Y since January, and I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of people, young adult survivors all across the country, and in listening to your stories and in listening to what I know Johnny and Tamika will say today, there's such a commonality here. There is a commonality of the grief experience from being diagnosed with cancer and having your life upended to losing your husband and having your future shattered. We share those experiences together. And there is a commonality in surviving this experience, whether it's as a cancer fighter or as a caregiver who survives the loss of a spouse, because we're all trying to figure out who we are now after this experience, how we've changed as individuals, how we learn to share these things and bring people into our lives and describe who we are in this world we never expected to be in. And so it was this year at my first OMG conference, which if you haven't been, is I2I's annual conference, where I got to listen to Johnny and Tamika speak. And the things that they were saying as cancer survivors resonated with me. How do I tell someone that I'm dating, that I'm a widow? How do I use these words? How do I make people understand that I'm a different person now than I was 3 years ago? All the sorts of things that they will talk about. And so when Sage gave me the chance to come here today and discuss this experience from a caregiver's perspective, I couldn't turn it down. So, as Sage said, I'll take any questions. I'll talk about sex during chemotherapy and marriage, talk about what it means now to date afterwards, what intimacy was like then and what it feels like now, emotional, physical, whatever you want. I can talk about the emotional burden of being a caregiver and what it's like to survive a death experience. We can talk about death, because I know we don't like to, but the fact is that people die from this. And I'm happy to talk about anything that it was like on that last day to watch my husband die. So please bring your questions, open it up. I don't mind talking about any of this, because I got through it without crying. So